So I recommend you take a break every now and again and just review, because if you stare at pixels too long, if you stare at anything too long, it starts to become a bit meaningless. If you love indie tales, be sure to subscribe here and on Twitch, where I'm live most weekdays. You can also show your support through Patreon or on itch.io, where I upload assets and games shown on the channel. Hey, welcome to another episode. Today, we're going to be covering dialogue portraits. These are sprites that you see that are character portraits of the characters as they're talking in, say, a JRPG or any game with dialogue, really. These are quite in-depth. There's a lot to cover here. I'm not going to be able to cover everything because a lot of it is just anatomy and style, and there's so much diversity there. But I'm going to see if I can give you the basics, and then we're going to make our own sprite. So, buckle up. Let's get into it. Okay, so the question is, what makes a portrait a portrait? They are from the shoulder up. They're a shot of the character's head. They are usually in the 3/4 perspective, so they're not front on. The character's looking in a direction, but you can still see all of their face. 3/4 means basically if this is one side of the head, this is the other side, this would be halfway, right? So this is the 50% mark. Well, this line passes through the 3 out of 4, 3/4 mark. Okay, they're a picture of a character, which means they need to convey some sort of expression as the character's talking. They give us some information about what they're feeling. So that's a portrait. Usually there's an opportunity when we're devising these portraits and putting them in the game to actually give some sort of stylistic take. So, you know, it's a way of showing the player something that they wouldn't see with the character sprite, you know, in the game itself. Usually they're much smaller, you don't get that detail. But it's also an opportunity to integrate the characters with the UI. Okay, so let's look at some examples. Okay, I think the quintessential example of portraits in video games, and particularly in JRPGs, would be Fire Emblem. Something about these portraits is so central in terms of like all of the different things you could do. This is like the most standard way of implementing these and presenting them. So we've got, obviously it's a JRPG, we're talking about, you know, anime looking characters, they're looking in the 3/4 perspective, it's shoulders up. So this is like exactly what you would expect. The actual implementation, I would say, is kind of an interesting one. The characters do take up a lot of the screen, which is great. There's plenty of space for the text, but there's no real UI behind it. On the flip side, something like Final Fantasy Tactics takes a bit of a different approach, where we actually have the text box with the portrait inside of it, and then we have this little arrow pointing to who's talking. I like that integration of the portrait, the UI, and the text itself to create context. And here we have, you know, two characters talking at once on the screen. Again, the portraits are very, very manga, anime inspired, although stylistically pretty different. There are a lot of similarities, and we'll cover those in a bit, but yeah, something to think about. Here is Final Fantasy Tactics Advance. Different character artist, different approach. What I really like here is this idea of the character being bound to the frame, but also giving them a sense of depth. So they're actually like coming out off the top of the frame. It sort of looks and feels then like this is a kind of space, like a window, and we're getting, you know, the character coming up through that window. Playing around with the frame is something that I think is like a great opportunity that you shouldn't waste if you're doing this kind of thing. Here's another example where the character comes out of the frame. This is Sora from Kingdom Hearts Chain of Memories. Most of these games are pixel art, and they are sort of more recent. So these last two were both Game Boy Advance games, which is sort of the last handheld system that had very, very strong, or at least was limited to pixel art. Of course, we cannot forget Stardew Valley. Stardew Valley has some really interesting portraits. Not all of them are 3/4 view, although most of them are. We have this nice character here. He's got a lovely head of hair like myself. And you can see here another example of where we actually see the portrait appearing in a space that gives it some kind of UI context. So, you know, the little scroll with the character's name, the character appearing inside of like a picture frame or a poster, maybe some shadow behind them and some tearing, There's a nice sense of skeuomorphism here that makes us feel like we're looking at a piece of, paper or a poster. We've also got other examples like Phoenix Wright, where we actually have the characters, not just as portraits, but as things in the scene. We're still sticking to that sort of 3/4 view for the most part. And in this example, we have a lot more room for expression because we're doing much more than just shoulders up. We have the whole torso. Another variation. Then we have a couple of examples from myself. This is Insignia. This is kind of an early version of the dialogue system from, I think, 2018. The game's changed a lot since then. But we have the characters as bookmarks, and they pop up and down depending on who's talking. The active character is above a little bit more, and the passive character is a little bit more translucent and, down slightly, and they move up and down as the characters talk. You can see I've got different characters in the game. They all follow that 3/4 perspective. And here's a more recent example from a game that I made last year called Arrowbound. And I've sort of played with this idea of the character's name is Apollo. So I wanted to play with that Greek origin and give him this wreath. Having him pop out of the wreath is something that I like, and is a direct reference to, these other games here where the characters are definitely coming out of the frame in a way. So these are some of my favorite examples. Let's look at the core here of what goes into a portrait, which is the character, and some basics on how to draw them. Okay, so here we have Roy from Fire Emblem, and what I've done is just a bit of a diagram over his face to give you some insight into what's going on here. So what are the properties of the human face when we're drawing it in this 3/4 perspective? Basically, the most fundamental thing is this circle. This here is what gets drawn first. The circle is the skull itself, obviously. From there, we define this point underneath. So at the bottom of the skull, the bottom of the circle, we have the bottom of the ear, we have the bottom of the nose, and obviously the other ear. And from there, we can draw the ear up, and we have the eye line. This is where the eyebrows or the tops of the eyelids are. From there, we have the mouth, and the top lip and the bottom lip are kind of equidistant with the nose. So we have the same line twice. And then we have a little bit extra for the chin. The jaw comes from just underneath the ear, runs all the way underneath the mouth, and then sweeps back up to meet the circle on the other side, about even with the center of the ear. So that's basically it. I can show you myself drawing my character Armin, who's the main character from Insignia. This is kind of the step-by-step of how I approach that. So the circle, the ear and the jaw, then filling in the nose, the eyebrows, the mouth. At this stage, I'm definitely not, making sure that, oh, this is exactly Armin's chin, because I can't really see it yet, right? I'm just trying to get something that looks anatomically passable. So I clean up that line. Once I've got the features in, I add the hair. I start making it look more personalized. So up till this point, it could look like anyone, right? The jaw is whatever it is. The shape of the head is whatever it came out as. I try not to get it perfect first time, or at least I don't expect to get it perfect first time. Then I start to shape things. So making the forehead a little bit more angular, the jawline a bit more sharp, extending that nose out because he's got a big nose. Yeah, just thinking about making it look more like him. And then just adding the shoulders in, adding some eyes. Bob's your uncle. So this is how I approach a character that I already know how to draw. But how do you differentiate between the characters? What do you change to make something look more like a man or a woman or a child or an old man? And how do you give them different expressions? Let's cover that now. Okay, so here are some different heads that I drew, very rough ones. You can see here we've got a couple of different axes. We've got masculinity and femininity, and we've got age. You don't have to break things down this way. Of course, there would be ethnicity and different axes you could change these by, but these are some basic breakdowns. Of course, humans are so diverse, and styles change and accentuate that diversity even more. So don't take this as like a be-all, end-all. I'm not really a character artist or anything like that, and many of you probably know how to do this much better than I do. So this is kind of for people who are just getting started, just trying to understand the relationships between these things. So the way this kind of breaks down is, I'll start with this neutral face here. Everything is kind of balanced. There's not too much angular stuff going on. It's not too boxy. To make it more masculine, you would flatten out and chisel the jaw a bit more. The shoulders become broader and more boxy. The head, again, also becomes a bit more square. Men tend to be squarer. On the flip side, to make it more feminine, you would make more of a point for the chin. There's a bit more roundness in the top of the head. The shoulders are less broad, and the neck tends to be a little bit thinner. It's more dainty, elegant. To make a character look younger, what we do is we enlarge in the eyes and we shrink the jaw. So like a child's brain, right, and eyes are like human-sized, but like all of their features are not. So like the nose is tiny, the mouth is tiny, the teeth are tiny, jaw is tiny. It hasn't all developed yet, except for the eyes, which are a lot bigger. On the flip side, to make somebody look older, we generally make the posture a little bit worse, right? We kind of make it look like gravity has been pulling at them for many, many years. So skin becomes more wrinkled. The ears and the nose keep growing as we age. So specifically in this manga anime style, old people always have big crooked noses and big ears. You have crow's feet around the eyes. You have, sometimes, gaunt jaw lines. We have laugh lines, maybe wrinkles on the forehead. This is how you make someone look older. So they become less smooth, more rough and haggard. So that's kind of a breakdown, very, very roughly, about how you can start at the very least approaching different size characters, different characteristics. A really cool example is this sprite sheet. Somebody collected this. I'm not sure where I pulled it from. I've forgotten now. But it's a rip from Fire Emblem on the Game Boy Advance. And it's just like a really, really good breakdown of so many different characters. And you can see a lot of this stuff at play, right? So the young men in anime tend to be quite androgynous. They tend to be quite feminine. So their jaws aren't so square, but whenever they try to make a character look more masculine, you can see that flat, square jaw coming out, right? Stronger cheekbones, squarer head. The women, on the other hand, much more pointy at the bottom and round at the top. Look at this masculine guy. His head is like basically a square. Again, the nose. I think there's something culturally in manga where they think big noses aren't as attractive. So villains always have very, very large, angry noses like this guy. Whereas, children, again, their head, the actual circle that makes up their head is huge. And the features are so small. The contrast in the face is so slight. It tends to be much, much less detailed. So I've shown you some characteristics of the actual facial structure. Let's look at the most important thing after the shape of the head itself, which are the eyes. Okay, again, huge disclaimer. I am not a manga artist and I don't do this every day. So this is my interpretation of how to do a very simple or standard kind of manga anime eye. So you start with an oval like this, usually a little bit wider at the top than at the bottom, kind of like an egg shape, like an upside down egg. Then you fill in your iris and your pupil, so it's just the same shape but a little bit smaller on the inside. The larger the shape, the more dilated the eyes look. Then you add a little bit of specular. This light here it's kind of like a reflection. And whenever we look at people, I think this, for whatever reason, makes things look more human, just to have that reflection of the eye. It's not a hard rule. You can put more than one in, but yeah, that's kind of how I go about thinking about it. I just always add one, usually in the top right. Then you add your eyelid. So the eyelids are really, really important, and they shape the emotion along with the eyebrows. The eyes are the window to the soul, so having like an eye that looks like this it's very open. Generally speaking, you can see, you know, our eyelid touches, like if someone's looking at you normally, the bottom of their top eyelid is usually touching the iris or the pupil. So it's being covered at the top. And I think that's kind of the most important thing. If we're looking to make this look more relaxed or natural, this black touching this black is super important. Then we give it some color. So when we color, basically, again, to make this look natural, the idea is that the eyelid is shading the eye, right? There's a bit of depth here between, you know, this point and this point, where this is more forward than this. So this is darker because it's being covered by the eyelid, which makes this brighter. There's also, I guess, another way to think about this, which is that if I was to draw this from the side, for example, the pupil sits here, and this is kind of like this, right? This is like further in. And so if the light is coming down from the top, it's going to hit this part a little more than this part. This is going to be in shadow, right? Like that. And this is going to be all lit up. That's a very, very broad, rough way of thinking about it. That's not like fully accurate, but it tends to be how people do this when they're drawing this kind of eye. So that's what I do. Also, we've got the lower eyelid. This can touch the bottom of the iris as well. And depending on which direction the character is looking is where the iris will sit in this kind of window that we've now created. So this space here is like the eye, and wherever this moves inside of that space, that's, you know, that's where we're looking. So that's how to draw a basic eye, at least how I like to do it. There are a few rules that I'd like to show you just to give you some idea about how to create different emotions before we go into the sprite. So I like to think of this as a simple factor of the iris and the eyebrow. Okay, so this is our iris, this is our eyebrow, and I'll erase to show the eyelid. So if the eyelids are covering over the eye, then you know, that's one controller. Another thing is the eyelids can come under the eye. That's another controller. And then the eyebrows can go up and down, and they can angle like this, or they can angle like this. Those are like the three properties. And just changing those three properties, you can actually make a whole lot of different kinds of expressions that don't have anything to do with the mouth at all. And so just looking at this, like if the eyelids are, you know, sort of in a natural position above and below the iris, and the eyebrows are level, then you have like a content face, right? Just a resting face. If the eyelids come over and the eyebrows are a little flatter, then we got this sort of unbothered look. It can be more excited if the eyelids come up and under. We get determined if the eyebrows are down, but the eyelids are level. Disappointed, right? Angry. Angry with the eyelids coming up and under. A lot of people know that it's that the eyebrows come down, but they don't really capture the eyelids coming under. And anger there. Sadness, obviously, eyes coming up. Fatigue, if the lids come down while the eyebrows are up. And hope, if the eyebrows come up while the lids are coming under. This is sort of, again, broad generalizations. I don't like to say any of this is like absolute, because different facial expressions mean different things to different people in different cultures, and not everyone's eyes look and work the same way. So take this as a rough guide. So that is my little primer on character portraits, the proportions, how to create expression, how to change characteristics of the anatomy to portray different people. I haven't spoken about hair, but we'll get into that in the spriting. So let's create a sprite. Okay, here we are in AEST Sprite. This is the app that I use. I know a lot of you asked the question, what software does Adam use? It's called AEST Sprite. It's ASEPRITE. So I have my AEST Sprite document set up. The resolution that I'm going to be working in is 64 by 64. I think personally this is far and away the most common resolution for portraits. It won't encapsulate your entire kind of frame, or at least it doesn't have to. But in terms of your characters, they should all fit in a standard size. And this is a really common canvas size. I can even show you, if we take sprites from characters in games and paste them in here, they'll usually fit in this space. There you go, straight in. Again, it's such a common resolution. It's like, for whatever reason, the industry agreed 64 by 64 was the size. So let's basically have a look at this. So I'm gonna draw Armin because he's my character, and if I draw him, I can say that's how he's supposed to look. So you can't criticize. What I always start with is just some sort of background that's a bit flatter. I don't want the grid in the way. And I'm going to just block in the head, as I always do. So it's really important to think about what you actually want your game to be able to show from a technical perspective. Like, are you going to have different portraits for the characters? You know, is this a neutral portrait, or is this supposed to be a portrait that can hold a lot of different expressions? Are you going to change those expressions with modifiers on the sprite? You know, in Fire Emblem, they actually move the mouths up and down. So there's actually a lot of diversity that you can come up with just in, you know, your approach to how you implement these. But I'm just going to go for a neutral sprite for now. So I'm going to draw my head shape. Obviously, in my mind, I'm thinking about this circle, and I'm going to draw it now because I said I would. So here's our circle. Let's give it a bit more shape here. We have our eye. So the 3/4 line is like here-ish. We've got our left eye, right eye. The ear would be somewhere around here, right? Which means the eyes are actually a little lower. Okay. Yeah, not a bad start. So remember, this line goes across this way. Bottom of the ear is where the nose goes. Okay. The mouth is usually similar distance here between the bottom of the nose and the mouth itself. Depending on who this is, you may not draw the bottom of the bottom lip. I'm going to leave it off for now, just to give you a better sense of what I'm drawing. So already we're at a pretty good spot. Knowing me, I want to put Armin's hair in here, so I don't want to miss out on the opportunity to give it a bit more height. So I'm just going to, underneath here, do our shoulders. And on a layer below, I'm just going to bring the neck under so that I can play with this without ruining the head. And as I always say, I like to get, you know, really, really nice and loose with this. Don't spend too long trying to make it perfect, because it's probably not going to be until you know, are ready for that level of detail. So I am not trying to get this perfect yet. I'm just trying to get it to look like a human who could exist, at least in the style that I'm going for. You know, is the head in the right spot for a person? That's what's more important than, does this look exactly like Armin? So like, I can already say like his jaw is way, way, way too square for Armin, but it doesn't matter right now because we're not there yet. Now that we're at this point, I'm gonna block the hair in just so that I know that I have space for it. Yeah, that's looking pretty good. And depending on what you're doing, you might find that you are okay with the character being cut off by the frame. It's totally up to you. Like if you're going for something more like Stardew Valley, then it's okay if your character's head gets clipped by the frame. If you're going for something more like Final Fantasy Tactics, then okay, you might want to have them peek over the frame, which means that they should definitely have full clearance here. It's kind of interesting, when I was looking at Tactics, I noticed that March here, his hair actually extends above the normal portrait line, so every other character fits in this very specific space, but then he's got this like one piece of like alfalfa hair that's just like way higher than everybody else's. Like even this guy's head gets cut off, but not the main character for some reason. So even professional games are inconsistent. But yeah, something to think about. Starting to think about the expression that I want. I'm gonna go for something neutral just because I don't want to confuse you guys too much. And one really interesting thing that I see a lot for these portraits is this idea that the light is coming from the side of the face that we see the most of. So the light's coming from over here, if I'm a portrait, which I kind of am. The light's coming from here, and this part of the face, right, is in shadow. And what that does is it allows you to create a shape for where the nose is without actually drawing a black line for the nose. Right? If I just take all of this and cast it in shadow, right? Now I have this shape for where the nose is without having to actually draw, lines like this. It can be one of those areas where it's very difficult to get nuance. And this is just one of those tricks to actually, try to capture some. Now, I tend to be very selective with my colors. That is to say, I don't select new ones because I'm working with a palette. So for me, I'm trying to get as much nuance as I can just with the colors that I've got in my palette. If you aren't working with a palette, then you can be as subtle as you want. Just be careful not to... if you use too many colors, things can look muddy. So try not to use too many colors. You want, generally speaking, if you're using the same style, this anime manga style, you want things to be as soft and, effortless as possible. And this process, I usually spend quite a lot of time on this. It might take me an hour for a portrait, maybe 2, if I'm really picky. If this is for the main character of my game, like I want to get it right. I want it to feel like what I imagine the character looks like. So I definitely don't try to rush this. And I'm just thinking about those things, right? Like what makes a character look older? What makes them look younger? What are the characteristics that I've decided that my character has? And sometimes if you take the hair away, you can see any flaws that you've got in the anatomy. Sometimes you get too caught up in the hair. That's why I like to, take it away and work things out again before I move forward. Nice, much better. Yeah. There's my boy. A bit more anyway. Not quite there, but getting closer. Now his nose is a little pointy. I'm just playing with trying to make the lines feel as smooth as possible. So notice the stepping. It's like 1 and then 1, 2, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 4, but then back the other way. 2, trying to keep that smooth as possible. If I do this, then it looks like it's not a smooth transition. It looks like we're going one way and then up because there's such a difference. But here it feels more gradual. It can be as little as 1 pixel. This is kind of where I think, you know, pixel art gets... People think that pixel art's really easy, but it can be very difficult. Especially when you're working in portraits and things that are very particular, like characters. Honestly, like people who are very, very talented artists, I don't know how they do what they do. I kind of do this like relatively often if I'm making a new character for Insignia, and there's no way that I could draw the same character the same way without sitting here and really, really playing with it for an extended period of time, right? I'm just not that consistent of an artist. Some people are very consistent. I think one of those things is like handwriting. If you have super duper consistent handwriting, then you're probably able to do it, but I don't. My handwriting's shocking, so. This is one of those things with anime style hair. It can be really difficult to figure out like how to create the spikes in such a way that they feel natural. It's super fiddly, but you do develop a little bit of an intuition for it the more you do it. I, again, do a lot of environment art, not that much character art. So I have this like ongoing debate in my head as to whether Armin's hair is dyed. Is it, you know, like actually red, or does he dye it red? I think he dyes it, I'm not sure. I kind of am always thinking about that when I'm doing this undercut area, whether it should be like a brown or a red. For now, we'll make it true to we'll make it his natural color. And it's when I'm working with colors like this that I really find the points where my palette is weaker. So like looking at these colors here, you can see these 3 are quite soft. The transition is really subtle, but this line here, like these 3, it's quite subtle. The point between these 2 is quite high contrast. So this line here is very clear. So I gotta be very careful about how I use that. Now I'm just gonna, as I approach the eye, just remember what I was doing here. So like the eyebrows are out in front. He's got quite a broad forehead, but I don't want that line to be too arched. I might stick with that. We'll see how we go. Okay, so let's start with the eyes. I'm gonna go on a new layer because again, I just don't trust myself with this process. I usually just plot something in and then something else. And then I just think, okay, is that the right size? Like how big should these eyes be? That's not too bad. I'm gonna go to the shade brush and just lighten these up a little. Starting to look okay. Let's bring this out a little bit. Yeah, that's not bad. Okay, and you can approach this a couple of different ways. What I think I'll do is create a white for the eyes, but I'm going to use the lightest skin tone that I have. I'm not going to use white. Mostly because I just don't think that it's not necessary to have such high contrast for something that's so subtle. Sometimes you just leave it off completely, right? You don't even bother with the whites of the eye. Again, we'll just see where this takes us. So we need our eyelid, and that's a bit exasperated. Oh, I don't think I want to do that this way though. Maybe like that. That's not bad. Not terrible. And this is the one area where I kind of like recommend playing with the colors a little bit. Like it's okay if you have to jump, you know, to very subtle variations of the colors, because there's sometimes just no other way to do it. You've got to just play with it until you get something that feels right. I don't want him looking so dead. Maybe some specular will help. I think that helped a little bit. We can make it a lighter color just so that it's in step with the rest of his eye. That's a bit much. Also, his eyes aren't red. His eyes are blue. So let's go to blue. And I want to give him a bit more determination than this. And it can be really helpful to shade the space, if there is any, between the eyelid and the eyebrow. If you make this darker, it generally looks pretty good. Again, just showing that depth. You know, the fact that there's like actually a you know, space in underneath it for the light to get shaded. Let's back this off a little bit. We're getting closer. And I do like to play with shapes. I like to experiment, you know. I'm never 100% certain about the way that I want this to look. I just like to see, like, okay, if I do this, what happens? Okay, what if I do this? You know, that's the only way that I end up really comfortable with the end result, is if I just try different stuff. Like, this is looking way, way better. You know, just changing a couple of things. And I like this, it's just something not quite right. It's really important when you're coming to this point and we're shading this edge, is to see what it looks like under different lighting conditions. Just in case your game is going to have the character sprites be over the game, like the level itself, rather than behind a frame. Because you might find it's really different depending on what you do there. So, you know, putting black behind here will make us want to make this darker, because we want to transition from this to this, so we make this darker. But if we go back the other way, it just feels like unnecessary, right? So just be careful of that. And I'm going to drop the eyes down, because I've just realized that I've been treating it as if it was all one layer anyway. Let's use a different background color so we don't get lost here. And just thinking about like the areas where things meet, and if I can make that easier, or, you know, easier to differentiate, that kind of thing. So like here, you know, how can I simplify this to show you details like his collarbone there without going too crazy? It's so tempting to just add detail here. It might be too dark. Such a subtle thing. So much pixel pushing. So much pixel pushing. Just single pixels. Oh, what if I change this? What if I change that? But I think we're getting pretty close. I think he looks good. And I'm just going to create the shade for the hair. And once you commit to a color, like this color here, right? If this is this dark, where his jaw is covering his neck, well then this up here should probably be at least that dark, where his hair is covering his face. Be careful, once you add a shade, you are kind of making a little promise that you will uphold that across the entire sprite. Give us a bit of texture. It's kind of cool. His face is looking maybe a little narrow. We could definitely take all of this and just shift it over 1 pixel. Like I said, these shades are there's quite a drastic shift in them, so it's probably going to look high contrast no matter what. If we really wanted to soften it, we'd have to either go like this into this, which I think is just a bit too soft, or create a new color, which I'm prepared to do now, for the good of the painting. Okay, looking better. And I only do that in the most, you know, difficult situations. If I can help it, I try not to do it. but it does give us a little bit more subtlety in some of these areas where we just don't want to sacrifice too much. Like here, helps us out a little bit. One thing you can do is just bring this shade all the way up to show a bit more depth in his jaw. In your character's jaw. Of course, you're drawing a different character to me, because you're probably drawing your own character. Okay. He's looking pretty good. There's a little bit of something going on here that I'm trying to pin down, but I quite like the light underneath. It's not really relevant here. You can barely see the difference between these colors, but you know, you could almost take them away and not notice it. And I think that's, you know, part of the process that's worth exploring. Like, if you can get rid of something, do it. Or maybe I can create a more confident shape. It just looks a bit stronger, right? More like I made a decision rather than just drew a bunch of pixels everywhere. One thing we can do if we want to be really crazy is shade this, and then maybe that will give us a bit more shape. Most of this is, you know, not really necessary, these extra shades. You can tell it's not really adding much. And I really have difficulty with smiles. I find them very hard to get right. You know, I want him to look neutral, but if I can give him just a little bit of tension in his mouth, just so it looks a little bit like something, then we can get away with having a smile that's just a flat mouth. I think it's looking good. Ooh, that's not bad either. Now, this is the kind of thing where I know if I go away for like, you know, a couple of hours and come back, I may feel very differently about what I'm doing here. I might look at it and say, oh, wait, what about this very important thing? So I recommend you take a break every now and again and just review, because if you stare at pixels too long, if you stare at anything too long, it starts to become a bit meaningless. So don't let it do that. Or at least if you feel like you're going in circles, moving the same things back and forth, that's your cue to step away. Okay. A portrait. So from here, you know, if I was doing like the start of a game, right, and I was just figuring out, okay, what do I want, you know, how do these portraits fit into the game, I would probably have like a different canvas that's like a bit bigger. Maybe it's all of this. And I would take my character and I would place them in the scene and be like, okay, like what do I have to do for my dialogue system? You know, maybe you mock it up. Maybe you go, okay, well, this is what the paper looks like. You know, if I was to redo the design process for what I was thinking, you know, I would have my page, you know, and I would say, okay, well, what do I want to do with this character? Like, how does he appear in this scene? Is he a character that's on their own sort of note? You know, maybe they've got a backdrop here, and the backdrop is maybe there's like a foreground element that's like a piece of paper, right? And they're sitting above that piece of paper, and the piece of paper has their name on it, like this, and it says, you know, something like that. You know, maybe we don't really even need this. Maybe this can just sit on top of the level like that. That's kind of cool. You know, and I would just play with ideas like that. Once you've got a few ideas, it gives you a better understanding of what you want to do. The paper thing, I mean, that's my thing, so like don't steal it. But yeah, like if this was like a sci-fi game, for example, like maybe this character is on a ship, right, in space. And so you want to show him in like some sort of like comms unit or something like that. So we have like a screen behind him, and you would have like little matrix metrics. There could be some sort of like machine At the front, he's like in a screen. Right? Maybe it's like classic sci-fi. So instead of it's like 80s future. So it's like this big CRT monitor. We've got those like scan lines going across like this. You know, you might even put a filter over the character. So there's like some sort of green wash over the thing. That's starting to look pretty good. And maybe there's like a terminal on the right that has what they're saying. Something like that. Beep, 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 beep. Do a barrel roll. You know how this works. You've played video games. And if you haven't, what are you doing? Go play some video games. It's your game. Go have fun making it. So that's how I do portraits. I would be most happy to answer as many questions as you have in the comments below, because this is a very picky and specific area, and your art style will change how you place your pixels. There's so much to cover here, and I couldn't cover it all in one video. So thanks for watching. If you do have more specific questions, be sure to join us on Discord, because I'm much more likely to answer you there. And there are other people here in the community who might have more experience than me in portraits who could give you some more helpful tips. So that's been the episode. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Hey pal, thanks for watching, and thanks most especially to the patrons and Twitch subs who support this channel and my game dev project Insignia. To find out more, click the links in the description below. And if you like this video, tell YouTube by clicking the like button, and then YouTube will tell me, and then I'll make more videos. That's nice. Thanks again, and until next time.